At 52, Margaret Chen thought she knew exactly who she was: a respected botanical professor, a dutiful ex-wife, a devoted mother to two grown children. Then Elena Vasquez walked into her university greenhouse with soil under her fingernails and questions about heritage seeds. And suddenly, Margaret's carefully cultivated life began to bloom in directions she'd never allowed herself to imagine. What starts as a mentorship between two women who've spent decades burying their true selves becomes a love story about second chances, finding courage in midlife, and discovering that some harvests are worth the wait, no matter how forbidden they once seemed. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she deadheaded the heirloom tomatoes, a nervous habit she'd developed over 30 years of tending plants instead of tending to herself. The university greenhouse had always been her sanctuary, a place where she could control variables, predict outcomes, and never be surprised by anything that grew. Professor Chen? She turned to find a woman in her late 40s standing in the doorway, backlit by a September afternoon sun. Elena Vasquez, she'd seen the name on the graduate student roster, wore dirt-stained jeans and a flannel shirt rolled to her elbows, revealing forearms marked with what looked like a lifetime of outdoor work. "I'm auditing your heritage seed seminar," Elena said, stepping forward with an easy confidence Margaret both envied and found unsettling. "But I was hoping to talk to you about something more personal. My abuela's garden. She passed last spring, and I'm trying to save her seed varieties before they're lost." Margaret nodded, grateful for the familiar territory of plant genetics and preservation. They spent the next hour discussing pollination techniques and storage methods. But Margaret found herself distracted by the way Elena's eyes lit up when she described her grandmother's chili peppers. The unconscious grace of her gestures, the earthy scent of sun-warmed soil that clung to her. "You really love this," Margaret observed. Surprising herself with the personal comment, Elena's smile shifted, becoming something more vulnerable. "I spent 20 years as a corporate landscape architect, designing outdoor spaces for hotels and office parks. Beautiful, sterile, meaningless. After my divorce, I realized I'd been designing my whole life the same way, impressive on the surface, empty underneath." She paused, holding Margaret's gaze. "I'm trying to grow something real now." The words hung between them like humidity, thick with unspoken meaning. Margaret felt something unfurl in her chest, something she'd kept pruned and contained for decades. "I'd like to help you," Margaret said quietly. "With your grandmother's garden?" "I'd like that too," Elena replied. And Margaret wondered if they were still talking about plants at all. Over the following weeks, their meetings became regular, then frequent, then essential. They'd work side by side in the greenhouse or in Elena's inherited garden plot across town, their conversations deepening from botanical to personal. Margaret learned that Elena had known. She was gay since adolescence, but had married a kind man to please her traditional family. Elena discovered that Margaret had never even allowed herself the question until now. "Did you love your husband?" Elena asked one evening as they planted bulbs for spring. "I respected him, appreciated him, built a life with him," Margaret said carefully. "But love? I'm not sure I knew what that word meant. I was so busy being what everyone needed me to be." Elena's hand found hers in the dark soil. "And now?" "Now," Margaret whispered, "I'm beginning to understand the difference between existing and living." Margaret's daughter, Sophie, noticed first. "You seem different, Mom. Lighter somehow." They were having their monthly lunch at the campus cafe, a ritual Sophie had insisted on maintaining even after graduating and starting her own career in environmental law. Margaret's instinct was to deflect, to make some comment about a successful research grant or a particularly good crop of experimental wheat. Instead, she found herself saying, "I've been spending time with someone, a friend. She's helping me remember parts of myself I'd forgotten existed." Sophie's eyes sharpened with interest. She, the pronoun hung in the air between them. Margaret felt her throat tighten, decades of careful concealment warring with this new, fragile honesty. At 52, coming out to her daughter felt both absurd and terrifying. Her name is Elena, Margaret said, each word a small act of bravery. We've been working together in the gardens. She's remarkable. Sophie reached across the table, covering Margaret's hand with her own. Mom, are you happy? The simplicity of the question broke something open in Margaret. Tears she didn't know she'd been holding spilled onto her cheeks. I think I might be. For the first time in my life, I think I actually might be. Then I'm happy for you, Sophie said firmly. Dad's remarried. You deserve that too. You deserve everything. But not everyone shared Sophie's acceptance. Margaret's son, James, took the news badly. This is a midlife crisis, he said, his voice cold over the phone. You're embarrassing yourself. Embarrassing us. What will people think? I don't know, Margaret replied, finding strength in her own uncertainty. And I'm learning that maybe that's okay. The whispers started at the university, too. Colleagues who'd known her for decades suddenly found reasons to avoid the faculty lounge when she entered. The department had suggested, with careful diplomacy, that perhaps she should be mindful of optics given her position. Even her research assistant began treating her differently, a new wariness in his previously easy manner. Elena, who'd lived openly for years, understood the weight of it. I won't push you, she said one evening as they sat in Margaret's kitchen, the first time Margaret had invited her into her personal space. If this is too much, too fast, no, Margaret interrupted, reaching for Elena's hand with a certainty that surprised them both. I've spent my whole life being too slow, being too careful, playing it safe. She lifted Elena's hand to her lips, a gesture so natural it felt like muscle memory from a life she'd never lived. I'm done hiding. They made love that night for the first time, a sweet fumbling exploration that felt nothing like Margaret's dutiful encounters with her ex-husband. Elena's touch was patient, curious, reverent. She traced the silver streaks in Margaret's hair, the lines at the corners of her eyes, the softness of her belly, finding beauty in all the places Margaret had learned to ignore or apologize for. You're magnificent, Elena whispered against her skin. Margaret wept, finally understanding what it meant to be truly seen. Spring arrived with an explosion of color in Elena's grandmother's garden. The seeds they'd so carefully preserved had taken root, producing varieties of tomatoes, peppers, and squash that hadn't been grown in the neighborhood for generations. Neighbors began stopping by, drawn by memory and curiosity, sharing their own stories of plants and people they thought they'd lost. My mother grew these exact beans, one elderly woman said, tears in her eyes. I thought I'd never taste them again. The garden became a community gathering place, and with it came an unexpected acceptance. These older neighbors, many immigrants themselves, seemed less concerned with labels and more interested in the continuity Elena and Margaret were creating together. Love, they seemed to understand, was just another thing worth preserving and passing on. Margaret's confidence grew along with the plants. She started bringing Elena to university functions, introducing her without qualifiers or explanations. Some colleagues remained distant, but others, particularly younger faculty and students, approached her with quiet gratitude. You don't know what it means, a non-binary graduate student told her. To see someone at your stage of life living authentically, it gives me hope. Hope. It was a word Margaret had never associated with herself before, but fear still had its moments. One afternoon, Margaret's ex-husband, Robert, appeared at the greenhouse unannounced. He looked older, tired, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Sophie told me, he finally said, about you and Elena. Margaret straightened her spine, prepared for judgment. And I wanted to say I'm sorry, Robert said quietly. I always knew something wasn't quite right between us. I told myself it was normal, that all long marriages felt that way. But I knew, Margaret. On some level, I always knew. And I married you anyway because it was convenient, safe, expected. The apology undid her. Robert, you deserve better, he continued. You deserve someone who made you light up the way you do now. I've seen you around campus with her. You're radiant. You never looked at me that way in 30 years? They stood in silence, mourning and releasing the life they'd tried to build on a foundation of should instead of want. Thank you, Margaret finally said, for your kindness now. That means more than you know. After he left, Elena found her sitting among the seedlings, crying quietly. Sad tears or healing tears? Elena asked, kneeling beside her. Both, Margaret admitted. Grieving all the years I lost. Grateful for what I found. Elena pulled her close. The best harvests come from mature plants. We needed all those seasons to become who we are now. That night, they lay in bed planning their future with the same care they gave to garden plots, a shared apartment by summer, perhaps eventually a small farm where they could expand Elena's grandmother's legacy. Dreams that once seemed impossible now felt like seeds waiting to sprout. I never thought I could have this, Margaret whispered into the darkness. I never thought I deserved it. We both deserve it, Elena replied. We both fought hard enough to finally choose ourselves. The Heritage Seeds Symposium was Margaret's idea, but it became their shared vision, a celebration of preservation, growth, and transformation. The university, perhaps eager to rehabilitate its reputation after the whispered discrimination, provided funding and space. Local gardeners, seed libraries, and indigenous plant experts all participated, with Elena's grandmother's garden serving as the centerpiece example. On the morning of the event, Margaret woke early, anxiety and excitement warring in her chest. Elena stirred beside her, immediately reading her tension. Second thoughts? Elena asked gently. About us? Never, Margaret said firmly. About being this public about us? I'm terrified. We don't have to— Yes, we do, Margaret interrupted. Not for us, but for everyone else who's watching. Wondering if it's too late for them too. The symposium was a triumph. Hundreds attended, drawn by the promise of rare seeds and ancient growing knowledge. But what people talked about afterward, what went viral on social media, was the keynote presentation Margaret and Elena gave together. They told the story of preservation, not just of seeds, but of selves, of women who'd spent decades living half-lives, pruning away their authentic desires until they'd nearly forgotten how to grow at all, of finding each other in midlife and discovering that the richest harvests often come from the most mature plants. I spent 52 years being who I thought I should be, Margaret told the packed auditorium, her voice strong and clear. It wasn't until I met Elena that I understood the difference between surviving and flourishing, between existing in the garden and actually blooming. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of people, many of them middle-aged and older, approached, them with tears and stories of their own. I'm 60 and just came out to my children last month, one woman shared. I've been married 40 years, another whispered. But I've always known. Is it really not too late? It's never too late, Elena assured her. Never too late to choose yourself. That evening, exhausted and exhilarated, Margaret and Elena returned to the garden. The summer air was thick with the scent of tomato plants and flowering herbs. They walked the rows hand in hand, checking on the plants that had become witnesses to their transformation. Do you remember, Elena said, that first day in the greenhouse? When I told you I was trying to grow something real? I remember, Margaret replied. I was talking about us, you know. Even then, I saw you and something in me recognized something in you. All that potential, just waiting. Margaret pulled Elena close, kissing her deeply under the darkening sky. Around them, the garden hummed with life, with growth and possibility and the wild. Unruly beauty of things allowed to flourish according to their own nature. I love you, Margaret said, the words still feeling new and perfect on her tongue. I love you too, Elena replied. Thank you for being brave enough to bloom. In the end, Margaret thought, that's what it all came down to. Not the courage to come out or defy expectations, but simply the courage to stop denying herself, to let herself want and be wanted, to finally, after 52 years, allow herself to grow toward the light. James eventually came around, grudgingly at first, then with genuine warmth after he saw them together at Christmas. Sophie stood as witness when they married the following spring in the garden. Surrounded by 3 generations of preserved seeds and new beginnings, the garden continues to grow, season after season, tended by 2 women who understand that the most forbidden fruits often turn out to be the sweetest, and that some harvests are worth any wait. Margaret and Elena's story reminds us that it's never too late to choose authenticity over approval, growth over stagnation, love over fear. What about you? Have you ever discovered something about yourself later in life that changed everything? Have you watched someone you love finally allow themselves to bloom? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be the permission someone else needs to finally choose themselves. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that their season of blooming might just be beginning. Coming in 2026. More stories of late blooming love and second chances. Subscribe to be notified when Margaret and Elena's full novel releases.